today we will finally be talking about how you can use a virtual whiteboarding tool called Mural to create your a visual content experience and to map it all out. A little bit about myself. I'm a 2013 graduate of the MSTC program here at NC State. And I'm currently working, I've been at IBM since about 2012. I started as a co-op, and I'm currently a content designer and strategist. They're working on IBM Cloud. And part of my role is leading our documentation build and operations and all the automated processes that go into transform. We work in Markdown over to HTML for all of the different products and services that host their docs on IBM Cloud. And the other piece of my role is creating templates, instructions, and standards for those same writing teams to create content. You know, we've got hundreds of different products that are within the cloud. They all need to have relatively consistent documentation for the best customer experience. And I create those templates so those teams can deliver it. Next slide. Okay, yes, and today's topic is how to go from, you know, when you have a new feature or a product, or even if you're revamping an existing set of documentation or content around a product, there's blank page syndrome, right? You could document any number of things, and you need to come up with a kind of cohesive strategy of how to create the docs that'll fit your users' needs from that. And that can be overwhelming at first, you know, where to start, how to make sure that you're covering the right content and for the right user, and how to make sure it's all accurate and well organized. And so we'll talk about how to go from that blank page to the next item, which is a full end-to-end content experience. And so what we consider that to be in IBM Cloud as content designers, we work on not only on the user interface, but also the product documentation and how to get that all mapped out ahead of time so it all makes sense. And what I'm going to go through today is one method of doing that we have, which is on the next slide, using Mural. If you're not familiar with it, there's a screenshot here. It's a virtual whiteboarding tool, like I said. We'll be looking at that very closely a little bit later on. Next slide. So what I'm going to go through today is first, I guess, an intro, or for many of you, it'll be just a refresher on some core concepts that come into play on how we use Mural to create the content experience and map it all out. Then I'll do a walkthrough of how we've actually used it in a very real way for our content experience planning. If you see CX, that's the acronym that we use. And then if we have time, which hopefully we will, we'll go through a little exercise of how to actually do it in Mural ourselves. So first, let's start off with those core concepts. Yep. I'm going to go through the ones that come into play mainly in the mapping that you'll see are content experience. What that means: progressive disclosure, information typing, journey mapping, and card sorting. So these are both concepts and kind of UX tools or information architecture tools that you can use, again, to create, map out your content experience. Next slide. Yeah. So first off, you've heard me say content experience several times already. What does that actually mean? It can mean different things in different places. So I'll talk about what it means from our perspective at IBM Cloud. Obviously, it just, you know, in your standard self-referential definition, it's how users experience your content. And so before we can talk about the content experience, what do we mean by content? For us, in our group, it encompasses what we call productive use information. As you saw earlier, both in the user interface, could also be a CLI, for example. So whatever the interface is, as well as the documentation. We don't create content for marketing, but in many ways, we make sure that we're in sync with marketing content, support content. We've got separate developer sites. So all these kind of little satellite areas to our main focus, which on our team would be the productive use content. And so what is the experience piece? That would be, there are a couple different facets to that. There's the first one, which is the context in which users encounter your content. And so what that means is where are they actually interfacing with the words that you've created What are they doing when they see it? What is their overall goal, apart from the immediate actions that they're taking to accomplish that goal? And then there's the aspect of it, which is how each piece of content relates to each other. So what information do they need when they're trying to do whatever action that is that they're doing? What do they already know by the time they get to that? And then what are they going to do next, and where do they go next? Next slide. Progressive disclosure is a big part of what we do. It's an interaction design pattern that divides information across multiple screens to avoid overwhelming the user. And what that means is showing them only what they need to know when they need to know it. Because if you started directly with, what's on the right here, which is a complete topic, it could be very overwhelming to users. They don't need to see all of that while they're actually doing the actions in the user interface. So you can see a mapping here on the left is what we actually included in the user interface. And what we consider content is, of course, not only that little paragraph at the bottom, but all of the field names, the filler text, all of that is part of that content design. We've got some tooltips there with the little information icons to, again, provide another level of progressive disclosure. And this is all part of the progressive disclosure model that we have in IBM Cloud, unfolding each of the information from each of those elements, meaning from the field names themselves, providing more information with the filler text, down to that the tooltip, and then the paragraph here in the little modal, as we call it, down to the link there for learn more, where they can go out for more details in the actual documentation. All of that is part of the content experience. Information typing. I'm sure you guys are very familiar with this. It's classifying content into distinct categories. It's the IT and DITA, Darwin information typing architecture. And so even though we don't use DITA ourselves, so we use Markdown for our content, and then of course in the user interface, that's going to be code. We still apply many of the concepts from it and information typing. So we'll look at, what are tasks, what are concepts, what are reference, and incorporate that into our content planning. Journey mapping. So journey mapping will come into play very much in what we'll look at today. It's a visual representation of the process the user goes through to accomplish a specific goal or to work with a product in general. So it's targeted towards a specific user or persona, and it'll break out the overall journey, which might be, again, for an entire product or on a slightly smaller scale, into specific high-level phases from beginning to end. And then as a part of each of those phases, you'll map out, for example, what actions are they taking? What do they need to know at this specific point in time? What are their other general information needs? What questions do they have? What emotions are they feeling? And so on and so forth. And you'll just map that out very concretely using questions or user quotes, for example. In general, at least how we do it, this isn't, just kind of pulled out of a hat. We've got conversations going with customers, so we better understand what they're doing, both for creating the product itself, and then also as a result of that, the content as well. And so all that will come into play in creating the journey mapping for the entire product experience, and then what we'll look at today, again, specific content experience. Card sorting. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this one. It's a UX tool for organizing pieces of information into groups and then labeling them. It's commonly used for, information architecture, for websites, products, documentation, any number of use cases there. And it's often something that's very physical, like as shown in this picture. And going back to our conference theme, we're looking at communication during a pandemic when we're doing everything virtually. And so Mural is a great way to do a virtual representation of something that's otherwise a very physical task here. And so we'll take a look at how card sorting comes into play in the content experience mapping here shortly. We used it ourselves, but it's also something that you can do with user testing, for example, and have your users sit down with the sticky notes and say, well, I think these should group together, and that can help inform your information architecture. Okay, next slide. So if you go, well, yeah, that's good too. From here, here's where I would be sharing my screen. So let's see if I have the ability to do that. I'll show you the actual mural as we have it created.
You should have ability to share your screen now.
Let's see.
Should.
There we go. Perfect. Okay. So this is the mural interface. You can see from the screenshot that I had in the presentations earlier, looked very much like this. It's very much, as I said, a virtual whiteboarding tool where you can just create sticky notes and otherwise write down notes. It's really good for using or for displaying relationships to each other and just ideating and making things very colorful and visual, more so than like a traditional, or just bullet points. Or set the stage, the content experience that we were trying to create. So as I said, I work on IBM Cloud, which is IBM's cloud platform. And we had a new feature called Enterprises, which affects how users can structure and organize their accounts. So our target users here were large customers who had many different accounts, and they needed a way to efficiently work with the billing and resources and access all the users in all of those accounts. And so there were many, many different facets of how this new concept that we were introducing into the product could, work its way into the documentation and the product experience itself. Almost every piece could be affected. We've got not only a basic account, but now these enterprises, which are much larger. So that can be quite a challenging, problem to try to solve with content because it's so wide-reaching, which is why we went through this whole journey mapping and content experience mapping here using Mural. So let's start looking at the journey mapping that we have here. You can see the overall here. It's a little hard. The overall journey here spans from creating the enterprise, actually setting it up after creation, how to manage the accounts within them, managing billing, viewing and analyzing usage, actually working within the enterprises, and then troubleshooting. And these were items or journey phases, I should say, rather, that were used by our product designers and offering managements and development teams to create the product experience as a whole. And so to be aligned with that product experience on the content experience side, we wanted to use those same journey phases. And so those are the different columns that you'll see here. That's where the journey mapping piece comes in. Let's see, the next piece was the information typing aspect. So that's this next axis here. You can see, as I said earlier, I've got different areas for concepts, tasks, and then reference documentation. And we use these to map out the different information needs of users as they went through each of these phases. So what I did was I sat down with our design lead and our offering manager or product manager to go through each of these journey phases one by one and think about conceptually, like, what do users need to know? So you'll see a lot of questions here from their perspective. Why would I want to create an enterprise? How does this even work? What does this even mean? What's an enterprise? And so at the conceptual level here early on in the journey, you'll see a lot of like whys, what is this kind of questions overall. And going down, let's see, tasks is again, actually actions that they're taking. So this would be, how do I create an enterprise? How can I use an API? What can I do with it after I created it? And we again just brought in questions from conversations that we'd had from users who were or current customers who were prospective going to use this feature. And then on the reference side is a little bit more straightforward, and that's because we already have standards and templates and whatnot for what makes an API doc set, or what makes a command line interface CLI doc set. So from those in the reference area, there weren't necessarily things we needed to ideate on specifically, because they'll just be comprehensive from A to Z in terms of what's available in the API or CLI specifically. So in other areas, you'll see that we did add in, if there were any additional reference types that weren't represented there, we'll have a little bit more detail there. But we did include them here in the journey mapping and in the content mapping, just to reiterate the fact that they would be needed at this particular point in time in the user's journey with the product. Let me see what else I wanted to note here. You might be wondering, what are all these colors and why are they here? I use this as a way to be able to highlight the different topic areas throughout the documentation. So these were already kind of existing areas that we had. Enterprise was the new thing that we were creating. Accounts is just what it sounds like. Account. Billing is, payment, usage tracking, things like that. Access being kind of what permissions do they need. Resources are the actual service instances that they create, support, fairly straightforward there, and so on. And so the reason we use this color coding is to be able to see if you zoom out at like a 5,000 foot view here, how does each of those areas, how do they come into play during each phase of the user journey? You can see it's a fairly colorful map here. And so particularly, billing here is purple. It's a touch point in each of these phases. So if you're creating documentation for it, you can't just stick all the billing stuff in a corner. It's going to be interwoven into whatever phase they're in at the particular time. And that again helps us make sure that we're providing the information that users need at the right point in time, and not making them bounce back and forth between a million different pages. Again, part of the content experience. So that was the first phase here, ideation phase. Next part is the card sorting. So what I did is we duplicated over to a new mural, which I did just to preserve if I ever needed to go back to what we had done here in terms of ideation to understand those specific touch points. And then we started mapping it out to what does this actually look like in the content, in this case, the documentation itself. Just pulling those stickies down from each of those phases. Working them into the framework that we had at an existing point. So each of these titles here are different collections of documentation that we have within IBM Cloud. And then we have an existing kind of information architecture framework that we are fitting this content into, and that's represented by these learn, how to, reference, and help sections. So we've got that framework in place. Now we need to start ideating on what should those actual topics be and what do they look like. And so we would just pull down the stickies and start grouping like content with like, figuring out, early on in their phase, we're here under the learn section. What is an enterprise? That was a question that we had come up. Started grouping items that would be good to know at that initial point in their journey. Other key concepts. This one's a lot more colorful because it pulls in each of those other areas as well. Best practices for actually getting an enterprise set up, and so on and so forth. And so we would just keep going, making sure that each of those stickies is represented here and finds a home somewhere in our documentation. So we've identified the fact that this is a content need on the user side, need to find out how it fits in with the documentation as a whole. And so this is really valuable for making sure you're covering all of that information that you've identified from your user journey within a wide variety of documentation. Because again, this wasn't actually quite a large feature, so there were a lot of different touch points where this would all be covered. You can see over in the billing docs, of course, it's looking a lot more purple over there. Purple was the billing, but again, it's not only in the billing docs, it's here under the main account management and enterprise, creation and adding accounts and other topics here as well. And if you're wondering, these the titles were created last, right? These were prospective titles. So after we have the grouping through our card sorting activity, start thinking about what would this title, what would the title of this topic be? What is overall the point of this set of documentation? And so that was the last step in the process. And as you can see, we ended up with a fairly comprehensive set of content here to act as our framework or our guidelines when we actually started writing the docs. The next piece of what we did here in Mural is once we had our content plan, so this is the content plan that we created, these stickies in our kind of initial IA. Of course, things can change as you start working through it. But the next piece is that other part of the content experience, which is, of course, what the user actually encounters when they go and work in the product. So one thing that Mural is great for, as I said, is providing visual mappings between different areas. And so we brought in the designs that we had gotten from our design team. Again, none of this actually exists yet. So these are just mock-ups of what the screens will be. And because we've already created this content plan over here, for example, in our Learn section for managing or what is an enterprise, we can know that the links here for whatever content we create will have that information over in the resulting area. So nothing is worse than creating text here and linking out to something that then does not actually have that progressive disclosure. Either it doesn't answer the user's question, or it's just, again, totally unrelated. And so because that content plan was in place, we then had more confidence. It was easy to be very specific and targeted with the actual words that we're creating here. And this is a kind of an overview screen. And then knowing that we'll have a topic to answer anything that we can't provide in 160 characters here, for example. And then other examples of that, you can see, I'm using letters, by the way. The reason for using letters here is to avoid this looking like a subway map or just like spaghetti, and arrows pointing all over the place. So again, an advantage of Mural here is you can just add letters in and link to the other areas in the content plan as needed. Okay, any questions on that front? If not, I'll show you what the, so I've shown you the plan here. You might wonder what it actually turned out to be. So this is what we actually came up with. This is live if you were to go to cloud.ibm.com/enterprise. This is the text that we created as a team. We've got those learn more links. If you click on it, something about accounts that move in with you, you go to that what is an enterprise page. And so you can see how this all translated from those little sticky notes over a Mural to the actual content plan. We pulled in pieces during our ideation sessions. It had, come up from our design team and our offering manager that, a diagram would be really useful here. So we marked that as something that was really needed. And then when it became time to show what do we mean by an enterprise hierarchy, we had that diagram created, and we knew how it would fit in to the rest of the content here. And so this is all those little sticky notes translated to all the text on this page, and it was worked into the rest of the documentation over here in a very organized way. And so again, it just makes the content planning much more integrated and with the actual product planning, and it's much easier to see the interrelationships between the different content areas through the color coding above, say, just a standard outline or bullet points. I'm a very big outliner, but using Mural and or having this visualization process makes it much easier to keep track of where the different concepts are being integrated across your content. Okay. Any questions? If not, then we can move on to an activity. I just wanted to check how much time we have. 10 minutes, huh? Okay. Well, then it will be, we might get through the journey phase process and then a little bit of ideation, I think, in that time. So I figured we could go through as a group, if you want to come off mute and just think about using an example of something that we all are fairly familiar with, using Netflix, what the different journey phases would be for a user's experience in there. And then from there, we can ideate on what types of information would they need and start mapping that all out. So, and unfortunately, like what I would do if I could have ahead of time was invite you to the mural so everybody could add stickies. But since I need particular email addresses to do that, I wasn't able to incorporate that. So I'll just be clicking and making stickies as we come up with items, and then we can, yeah, just populate this mural out.
Hi, Carolyn. My name is Michael. So as far as I know, based on the content experience mapping, a lot of it has to do with questions that would then lead to be iterated into the actual process.
Yep.
So I think for using Netflix, I think one of them would have to be creating an account. And I don't know if that's a prerequisite or if that would fall under the under a sticky note.
That's a great idea for a journey phase, actually. So that's like an overall phase of what they're trying to do. Create an account. So I'll add that as a title.
Okay.
A next one, just to get us started here, might be browsing for videos, finding content.
What about setting up accounts across various platforms? So maybe on your phone, on your laptop, on your Roku or Apple TV.
Yeah. So that could be under this creating an account step, but something that you might think about is like, or a question would be like, does this work on different platforms? Can this run on my TV? You know.
Which account type should I make?
Yep, that's a good concept. Which account type do I need?
Maybe under concept, creating a, I know that Netflix has like a kids account. I don't know if we could phrase that under the concept of, how do I make a child account to provide age appropriate content? That's
an interesting one. Like I think that could be actually a whole phase. So like, for example, managing child accounts, I'll just say like that. Yeah. Because there could be other pieces of that, like how do I know which content is age appropriate?
There's different, kind of things that can branch off of that too, because different parents let their children see different things. So that could go a little bit more in depth as well.
How can I control what my child sees?
And then I have an idea for finding video content. I'm not sure if it fits under concepts or tasks, but it would be searching for specific genres. So if I wanted to look up like South Korean horror films in particular, would that be a task?
I search for content.
Genres.
Yeah. And maybe like conceptually, it's like, can I, or what are genres? Maybe even what are recommendations? If they're going to show you recommended content. And how do they work? I know the font here gets real tiny. So let me know if you guys can't read it. Trying to zoom in. Let's see. Some other phases that could be are something around billing as well. Need to, how do we manage, or managing billing and payment?
Yeah, and under that, I know, so I use, one of my credit cards provides like 3% back or 6% back on streaming. So I don't know if under the concepts, there is like offers that allow cash back for credit cards. I don't know if that's out of scope or not.
Nope.
Are there any offers?
Perfect. Cashback rewards. I'm going to zoom in. I can barely read that. I know you guys can't. Are there any cashback
Can you stretch
rewards?
the sticky note?
What was that?
Can you stretch the sticky note to expand the text size?
Yeah. Let me see if it'll, I think it always creates at the same size though. Yeah, whatever the default size is. Let's see, how about just payment methods? Or I'll do it as a question. Always good to have a question.
Maybe like
Maybe.
how to cancel your subscription, or how to use like a Netflix like gift card.
Yeah.
And
Are there
also
gift cards?
monthly billing versus yearly billing.
Oh, that's great. Also under that same phase, I think maybe I'll let you write that out first, Carol.
I like it though, guys. Keep the ideas coming. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So Sayi, do you want to rephrase your question again so that Carolyn can add it to the board?
Yeah. I was asking, can we add something about monthly billing versus yearly billing cycle?
Yeah. What are like, how do billing cycles work? And how do I manage my billing cycle or change?
And then I have something for that same phase, which is, are there discounts for, say, students?
Yeah. Are there student discounts? Let's see, something, trying to think of others, creating an account. We could separate out actually managing. I don't know off the top of my head how Netflix does this. So this, again, depends on their own, I guess, product experience, but like, can you invite others to your account? Or how do you manage who has access to your account? I think there's creating an account, but there would also be a phase for just general account management. Generally.
And I know from experience that you can create multiple profiles. And so you could share your account and then build profiles. So maybe one of those questions is, how do I create profiles for various users?
Create profiles. This is an interesting one. And I say it's interesting because it could also come under finding video content. So I guess how do I create profiles would be under managing your account, but then you would go over to finding video content and have something like, how do I view the content for my profile? What is a profile? Of course. What is a profile? Would be concept there. I'll make that a little bigger.
I think related to what is a profile under managing child accounts, I think that maybe like, what is a kid's profile entail? Or I don't know if it's already redundant based on the other questions.
No, and even if it is, when, and I don't know that we'll have time to do this, but when the card sorting phase comes, you'll start to see, okay, is that grouped under profile? And then you can kind of see how for the entire child journey, you have the content, for those specific journey, I guess, worked into the rest of the profile information. And so you might have linkages between them. You might decide in the card sorting that you want to have something specific to managing child accounts here. But it's not, for example, necessarily a one-to-one mapping between these individual journeys and then what the actual card sorting ends up being, depending on how that goes. So
Carolyn, just FYI, we're almost at time.
Okay.
But I'm really curious to know, what would we do with this?
Yeah, so from here we would start, once we populate out all the sticky notes, then you would start arranging it and say, okay, well, I see something about, I'm going to add another like resetting password or something over here. You know, whatever the sticky notes would be, and start pulling them down into different groups. So I might have profiles here, and then let's see, I might have, how do I view content for my profiles? And then just start grouping it all together. Like, again, what is a profile is usually the first one. So something, a concept to kind of set the stage. Resetting a password, although it's technically under this user journey, not necessarily part of that. So you'd put that over in a different group, you know, and you just start organizing things in order to make sure you've got kind of complete topics or pages that incorporate all of the different information that you know, that you had identified during the mapping phase. And so I can tell you from having done it again for this major enterprise feature that it is absolutely essential for making sure you get all those pieces covered, more so than trying to figure it out as you're going along later on. So that's a huge benefit of this approach.
Thank
I do
you
have
so
another
much.
question.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'll be quick. So I know that you used color coding in the enterprise content journey map that you created, but and I know one of those codes is billing. So for the one that we are creating, you know, how would you suggest that we color code it to organize it visually?
Yeah. So let's say, you know, we're here in billing. There's a lot of, if we're going to use purple, these could be purple. But there's also going to be, I would imagine, something purple, you know, or something related to billing, to creating an account. What, again, that could be what payment methods are needed, or what are the billing cycles. So there's the initial account creation step and what we need to provide there. And then there's the ongoing, you know, after you're a customer, billing and payment method here. So that would be one instance of, like, you could make everything related to payment, you know, purple, as I did before. You could have something around passwords, or you know, access to the account be a separate color. You might have something around technical, you know, limitations or challenges be a third color. So it's really up to you on how you want to create, how you want to bucket those colors. But I think you would find as a result, when you go through that you'll tend to see kind of blobs of colors, but then the interrelationships between them with little satellite stickies, you know, in the other topics. So that's how I would go about it.
Thank you so much,